second-hand ones, or essentially existing submarines, not newly built submarines. It's still a little unclear how this will all work.
It is, but I think the good news about getting these Virginia-class submarines earlier is it's going to fill that capability gap with the retiring Collins-class submarines that was going to be a real issue in the 2030s for us. So to get some of these submarines in earlier, they're obviously sophisticated technology. That's going to solve a short-term issue for Australia. There's suggestions that we could fund some of the production line in the US, whether it's maybe not necessarily a third production line to build them, but maybe fill some of the night shifts and pay for some extra production on that to appease the Americans. Because obviously there has been concern in America that, well, if we're going to be taking their submarines, that's going to leave them with a shortfall there. So it's going to be very interesting to see the announcement on Tuesday morning Australian time, how Joe Biden and also Anthony Albanese and Rishi Sunak explain that.
Yeah, and we're going to get to that with our guest in a moment, those concerns in the US about their capacity to do more than they're already doing for their own submarine fleet. Look, the Prime Minister, he hasn't confirmed any of the details yet ahead of the announcement, but he has been keen to give this assurance.
Australia will retain absolutely our sovereignty, our absolute sovereignty, 100%. It is very important that Australia as a sovereign nation state, and that's something that's respected by all of our partners as well.
Lenore, Malcolm Turnbull's been raising some concern about this, and if they're jointly crewed, these submarines, you know, who will the American personnel answer to and so on if there's a disagreement over where the subs should be, what they should be doing. Anthony Albanese, though, sounds pretty adamant. There will be absolute sovereignty. Is it so sure?
I don't think so. I mean, I think this is one of the real risks about this whole decision. There's the risk about the strategic assessment of the risk that China poses in the first instance. There's bipartisan support around that, and obviously China is taking a more aggressive posture, but you know, we seem to be united around a particular view of China. And then in terms of the sovereignty question, I mean, these jointly crewed submarines are completely integrated into the US defence system. If a future American Commander-in-Chief took a particular decision at a really strategic time, you know, when conflict was brewing, would we really be able to take a different decision in that circumstance? I'm not at all sure. I think
isn't that what the Prime Minister's saying, though?
It's what he's saying, but in that circumstance, I'm not sure that that is actually what would happen in practice. I think we'd be so integrated into planning and defence posture of the United States that I think it would be certainly incredibly difficult.
Yeah, I think in theory we retain our sovereignty, but in practice, like you say, there's probably going to be joint crewing of these submarines, at least initially, when they potentially come to Perth from 2027. And then longer term, we're deeply immersing ourselves, even more so than we already are in the US defence system. And this is not only for a few years, it's for multiple generations.
So we don't know who that future Commander-in-Chief would be. Joe Biden will be there on Tuesday, but it could be a re-elected President Trump. It could, in 20 years' time, it could be someone we haven't heard of yet. I mean, that is a risk inherent in this decision.
Of course, offsetting that is the concern that we wait until we build our own submarines, and that is clearly going to be a very long time.
And now Richard Marles is also putting a question mark under the Collins-class upgrade as well. Maybe not all 6 boats are going to be
Some of them
upgraded.
are going to get what do they call it, a life of type extension. But buying some off the shelf, as the phrase goes, from the United States, these Virginia-class means we have that capability a whole lot earlier. It's also something that Peter Dutton, the opposition leader, has been advocating for some time.
It's an established type. It's not going to have cost overruns and time blowouts, and time really is of the essence. We shouldn't kid ourselves about what we face in the region at the moment, and if that gives longer time for a new design to be worked up and the problems to be ironed out, well, that's a good thing.
I guess the question too is, Rosie, if they're so good, and they are, the Virginia-class submarine, and we do manage these difficulties around how we crew them and so on, why wouldn't we just stick with that submarine? Why would we bother with a newly designed AUKUS submarine years later?
Like this idea that we could be running 2 different types, maybe 3, if you've got the Collins class in the mix as well, submarines at the same time, different safety books, different facilities required, different crews required for each boat. The duplication issue is a very real one, and it'll be interesting to see how Anthony Albanese treats it on Tuesday. Also, this idea of sovereignty, is he going to be clear how 100% absolutely sovereignty will be dealt with. Does it just mean that we'll have 51% Australian crew and that makes it an Australian sovereign boat? I think it'll be interesting detail to hear from the Prime Minister.
Exactly. It sounds like a lot of detail will have to be, maybe not at the announcement itself, but in the following days and weeks, a lot of this will need to come out. And then there's the bigger picture question of the case for doing this. I mean, the cost is going to be eye-watering. We don't know yet, but it'll be well in excess of $100 billion. The ASPI estimate is about 170 billion, and now that's over some years, of course. But does the government need to make the case to the Australian taxpayers, footing the bill over the coming decades for all of this, as to why we can't do other things like increase job seeker or pay super on paid parental leave, but we can do this? Has that case, John, do you think, been made?
Well, I think it's only starting to have that conversation, and it's probably been missing from the public consciousness up until this point. I'm not sure typical people who don't follow politics that closely are broadly aware of this. I mean, it is going to put enormous spending pressure on the budget, probably an extra $10 billion a year or so over the long term. ASPI says, $170 billion to around about 2050, including to operate these things. You build that on top of other spending pressures, NDIS, aged care, health. Unless we can sort of find some magic pot of money or grow the economy faster, get productivity going, to get more tax revenue through the door without lifting taxes, the alternative, as Heather Smith, who's a former top bureaucrat, Office of National Assessment person, said at the Financial Review Business Summit this week, we need to probably have a conversation about the tax and the spending side of the budget, because there's all these pressures.
Do more than nips and tucks.
Mix with deglobalisation, decarbonisation, all this other stuff that's going on in the world at the same time, which is going to be expensive as well.
Yeah, just finally on this, Lenore, I mean, the bipartisanship will help politically with this huge parcel of money that's going to be required. But what about the electorate? Do you think Australians are on board for this?
I think it's a discussion that's just starting, and that's one hell of an opportunity cost you're talking about, with defence spending going up well over 2% of GDP. People are going to need to have really good reasons as to why we're making those choices.
All right, well, time to talk to our guest, US Congressman Joe Courtney, who serves on the House Armed Services Committee. He's also the chair of the subcommittee on sea power and projection forces. To take us there, here was the Prime Minister giving an assurance there will be jobs for Australians under this deal.
This is about jobs, including jobs in manufacturing, and Adelaide in particular will be a big beneficiary of this announcement, as well as Western Australia in particular. This is about building up our capacity. And when you talk about the issue of manufacturing submarines in Australia, that's an absolute priority for us. That will be seen as part of the announcement.
Congressman Joe Courtney, welcome to the program.
Hello, David. Glad to be here.
The AUKUS details will soon be announced, but based on what's been reported, can I ask you about this capacity question? Does the US have the capacity to provide 3 and maybe even 5 Virginia-class submarines to Australia?
Well, again, I think it's important to step back and recognize that today, as we're talking, the U.S. industrial base has delivered 21 Virginia-class submarines over the last 2 decades. There'll be 2 more this year, the Rickover and the New Jersey. That will bring it up to 23, and that production cadence, which was slowed down by COVID for some period of time, really, I think, is very much back on track. In addition to the Columbia ballistic submarine program, those subs are 2.5 times the size of a Virginia. And again, that's a must-do program. So our workforce has been growing. We hired 4,000 people in southern New England last year, 5,700 projected for this year. 6 years ago, we saw this bow wave coming in terms of hiring, and we have job training programs for young adults who are doing something else that can quickly get trained up and skilled up as welders, electricians, machinists. We have, again, secondary school programs for tech kids, tech schools for kids in those same professions. They can walk walk out of school at age 17 or 18 and walk into a career. So again, I think it's actually going to be a very exciting opportunity for Australia. And again, I know, sitting on the Education and Labor Committee here in Washington, we've had Australian expert witnesses talking about your apprenticeship programs. Again, we don't have to do this tonight. You know, we've got, again, some runway to really stand up these programs. And as I said, I think it's going to be a transformational undertaking, enterprise for working people in Australia.
But coming back to that question of can it be done, there are some doubts there in the United States. We've heard the chair of the Senate Armed Services Committee, Jack Reed, the former Republican Senator James Inhofe, the Rear Admiral Scott Pappano, the senior officer in charge of the US Navy's submarine program, all expressing some concern about the capacity there being pushed to breaking point. Are you confident this can be done?
I am, and again, there was a counter, obviously, communication on a bipartisan basis from the leadership of the Armed Services Committee that pointed out that this is not a zero-sum game. Again, if you look historically at the submarine industrial base in the U.S., which is well over 100 years old, it's grown and contracted given, again, external events, the security environment. If you look at the height of the Cold War, we were building 4 attack submarines at the same time as the ballistic submarine program. Again, right now we realize we're going to have to do some more outsourcing, and you guys were discussing that in terms of Australia possibly being a contributor, whether it's steel fabrication, parts and components. That's happening today down in Alabama with Austal USA, a division of an Australian company I visited just a couple weeks ago. Again, the new steel fabrication plant that they're putting up there, again, to take some of the man hours away from southern New England. That's going to, again, keep these programs on schedule and the cadence moving forward, which the Navy's demand signal requires.
Just on that issue of what Australia will need to contribute here to make this happen, you know these production lines better than most. Would Australia funding a whole new production line be the best approach, adding some funding to the shifts on existing production lines? What should Australia be doing here? What would be the best approach?
So again, on Monday, I think you're going to see a very thoughtful product. These are really serious people. Admiral Caldwell, the head of Naval Reactors, who has been the U.S. principal at the table, understands this stuff, backwards and forwards. And so, again, I think it will probably be done, incrementally in terms of really trying to get people sort of acquainted with the systems. And some of the exciting new virtual technology now that's happening in shipyards, as well as robotic welding and ways to really pick up the production rate compared to even what it was 10 years ago. So again, I think everybody understands this is not something that you can just flip a switch and you've got an industrial base to take on really probably one of the most complex types of manufacturing imaginable. You're building a vessel that is operating in an environment that does not support human life. I mean, everything has to be perfect. But as I said, we've got some really good programs. And by the way, I visited the British shipyard up in Barrow and seen the great work that they're doing with the Astute class and the Dreadnought class. So that's the exciting thing about this partner. I mean, we've got 3 countries where the trust level is as strong and deep as possible. Countries with already pre-existing industrial bases, so there's a lot to work off of. And I would just note that even looking at the Collins class submarines, again, there was U.S. technology on board those submarines for weapons systems. Again, I've visited HMS Sterling and saw it myself. So this is not brand new stuff in terms of collaborating. The U.S.-UK collaboration is, if anything, even more widespread and well precedent, deep precedent in terms of succeeding.
Just to be clear, though, Australia will have to contribute to production capacity in the US in some way. I think all 3 countries, and we're all going to, it's going to be a mixture. I mean, everybody's going to be sort of contributing to each other's needs. And certainly to the extent that
again, getting the Australian workforce sort of up and running, the fact that there is not an existing AUKUS submarine program right away in the late 20s or mid 20s, I mean, then obviously contributing to the Virginia program is just a logical way to increase proficiency for welders and electricians and all the skilled jobs that take that repetition and take that cadence to really get up to the high level of quality.
And
that's,
doing that,
that's mandatory.
doing that through a new production line or just adding extra shifts on the shipyard in your district, Connecticut?
There's no question we're building out capacity. We just cut a ribbon on a new production facility that cost $700 million to build, and there's more facility that's going up. Again, if you look at World War II, what Groton looked like in terms of the number of production plants that were there. Again, this is not something new in terms of expanding facility.
But you'll need Australian help. You'll need Australian help.
It is now. No question about it, and we welcome it, and I think it'll benefit Australia in terms of really getting a workforce that's going to have the skill set to build its own subs, and that's what I think is really what everyone wants to see happen. We want this program to succeed.
Would it be more likely Australia gets existing Virginia-class submarines or brand new ones?
When it comes out, you'll see.
Okay.
Like I said, there's going to be, I think, what I will tell you is what you will get is of the highest quality. And I say that sincerely. Again, the shelf life of a Virginia-class submarine is 33 years. And it has life of boat nuclear reactor. It doesn't require refueling. No one's going to be, foisting off clunkers on good friends and allies. I mean, this is about really having the type of stealth and the type of reach which the strategic environment requires. I mean, China's missile force is really, in my opinion, the real reason that's driving this decision, because surface ships right now are so vulnerable. And we saw it in Ukraine, where two relatively crude short-range missiles took down the flagship of the Russian Navy. Again, the surface is really a much more risky place, and unfortunately, a diesel-electric, which was the prior plan, has to exist and operate on the surface.
What's the risk of a future US administration, potentially even a second Trump administration, considering that all of this is too risky? We want to put America first. We like Australia, but we're putting America first. What's the risk of that?
Well, I would tell you this. I mean, talking to my Republican colleagues, working with the Australian Friends of Australian Caucus and the AUKUS working group, I mean, there is very strong support within the Congress on a bipartisan basis for this effort. I really do want to foot stomp, though, the discussion about who's in charge and who makes the decisions. Again, there is already existing collaboration between the Australian submarine force and the U.S. submarine force. I've seen it personally. And no one questions about who's the decision maker in terms of how your subs operate. There will be some moments, I'm sure, when Australian sailors will be on board Virginia-class submarines, but that's going to be for training purposes. That's not for operational missions in terms of where they're basically saluting U.S. officers. And again, this is going on today with the UK and U.S. submarine forces. They have visiting sailors, visiting officers, but it's really for instructional training purposes.
I think the concern, though, is more about the concern is more about when Australia purchases these US submarines and the likelihood they're going to be jointly crewed with Americans. Will those American personnel answer to an Australian commander if there is a disagreement?
Well, again, I think the notion that there's going to be joint crewing is really overhyped, honestly.
You don't think there will be?
Again, I said there clearly has to. I don't. I think that everyone understands we need to train up the Australian sailors and officers in terms of nuclear propulsion, which is all we're talking about here, not nuclear weapons, and that when the time comes for the deed, the title to be handed to the government of Australia of a vessel, that again it's going to be totally with the full understanding that it's going to be under Australian control.
Even nuclear technicians won't be required from the United States?
Again, the training schools in the U.S. for sailors, and again, one of them is in my district, you know, you're talking about kids who come in with zero qualifications. When they leave these training programs, they are qualified. And the same is true of the officers. And by the way, that's already started to happen in terms of the training. I mean, that can't wait. We got to move that out as soon as possible. But no one wants to be in a situation where there's any conflict of you know, who's in charge or who's giving orders or who's taking orders. We understand that's precious for you know, every nation to be able to control and make their own decisions.
A final one, Congressman. You mentioned the bipartisanship that you've encountered there in Congress for this whole deal. What about the export controls in the US there that do need to change to allow this technology sharing, not just on the nuclear submarines, but other technology as well under AUKUS? Just explain to us what the obstacles there are and how challenging and this will be to resolve.
Sure. So we have an Arms Export Control Act, which is, you know, very tight in this country in terms of export of, you know, defense components and pieces. I mean, it's just endless in terms of its scope. And the goal here is to really try and create a carve-out for AUKUS, which avoids, again, these becoming barriers in terms of, you know, really getting the technology transfer that's required. We have such a carve-out for Canada today. Again, the defense sectors are much more free-flowing and seamless because of the fact that we made that adjustment, and that's going to be a focus. You know, again, the clock is ticking here in our congressional session. You know, it's a little tricky right now in terms of the overall politics of this chamber, but everybody understands that that's something that definitely needs to be focused on. We're looking at the Defense Production Act amendment, which I've already introduced or submitted requests for modification to help AUKUS in that arena. And so that is clearly a must-do item for Congress. And as I said, I think, you know, based on the Armed Services Committee, the Foreign Affairs Committee, a lot of the discussion, I think Monday is going to be a really great opportunity to elevate the importance of all three countries working together, and that includes the U.S. Congress. So, you know, I feel good about the fact that as difficult and as polarized as Washington is right now, that this is an issue that's going to get really serious attention and finally, you know, enactment.
Congressman Joe Courtney, appreciate your time. Thanks so much for talking to us.
Great. Thanks, David.
Right, let's get back to our panel. We're joined once again by Lenore Taylor, John Keogh and Rosie Lewis. Just want to quickly pick up on a couple of things there. We're not going to be sold old clunkers, which
good
is
to know we're not getting clunkers.
Good to know. But it's a fair point, these things.